Your ama clutch seems to my watchful eye to be recovering from the ailments you described when first we met. Perhaps now she is up to overseeing 15 girls? No, no, said Galinda quickly. There are recurrences from time to time, but I don't mention them. I don't like to be a bother. How thoughtful, said Madame Mumble. Bless you, sweet thing. Now, my dear, I wonder if we might take a moment, as long as you've come in for a chat, to discuss your academic plans for next fall. As you know, second year is when girls choose their specialties. Have you given it any thought? Very little, said Galinda. Frankly, I thought my talents would just emerge and make it clear whether I should try natural science, or the arts, or sorcery, or perhaps even history. I don't think I'm cut out for ministerial work. I'm not surprised that one such as you should be in doubt, said Madame Morrible, which wasn't greatly encouraging to Galinda. But may I suggest sorcery? You could be very good at it. I pride myself on knowing this sort of thing. I'll think about it, said Galinda, though her early appetite for sorcery had waned once she'd heard what a grind it was to learn spells and, worse, to understand them. In the event you choose sorcery, it might be possible to find for you a new roomie, said Madame Morrible, given that. Miss Elphaba has already told me her interests lie in the natural sciences. Oh, well then, I certainly will give it a great deal of thought, said Galinda. She struggled with unnamed conflicts within her. Madame Morrible, for all her upper-class diction and fabulous wardrobe, seemed just a tad, dangerous. As if her big public smile were composed of the light glancing off knives and lances, as if her deep voice masked the rumbling of distant explosions, Galinda always felt as if she couldn't see the whole picture. It was disconcerting, and to her credit, at least, Galinda felt inside herself the ripping apart of some valuable fabric. Was it integrity? When she sat in Madame Morrible's parlor and drank the perfect tea. For the sister, I hear, is eventually coming up to Shin, concluded Madame Morrible a few minutes later, as if silence had not intervened. And several tasty biscuits, because there's nothing I can do to stop it. And that, I understand, would be dreadful. You would not like it. The sister, being as she is, undoubtedly spending much time in Miss Elphaba's room being tended to. She smiled wanly. A puff of powdery aroma came forward from the flank of her neck, almost as if Madame Morrible could somehow dispense a pleasant personal odor at will. The sister being as she is, Madame Morrible tutted and wagged her head back and forth as she saw Galinda to the door. Miserable, really, but I suppose we shall all pull together and cope. That is sorority, isn't it? The head grasped her shawl and put a gentle hand on Galinda's shoulder. Galinda shivered and was sure Madame Morrible felt it, knew it, but the head never registered a sign of it. But then, my use of sorority, how ironic. Too witty. Given a long enough time, of course, a wide enough frame, there is nothing said or done ever that isn't ironic in the end. She squeezed Galinda's shoulder blade as if it were a bicycle handle, almost harder than was proper for a woman to do. We can only hope, that the sister comes with some veils of her own. But that's here yet. Meanwhile, we have time. Think about sorcery, would you? Do now goodbye, my pet, and fresh dreams. Galinda walked back to her room slowly, wondering what Elphaba's sister was like to provoke those catty remarks about veils. She wanted to ask Elphaba, but she couldn't think of how to do it. She didn't have the nerve. Come on out, said the boys. Come out. They were leaning in the archway to Boq's room, a pell-mell clot of them, backlit by the oil lamp in the study beyond. I was sick of books. Come with. Can't, said Boq. I'm behind in irrigation theory. Fuck your irrigation theory when the pubs are open, said the strapping Gillikinese bucko named Avaric. You're not going to improve your grades at this late date, with the exams almost over and the examiners half crocked themselves. It's not the grades, said Boq. I just don't understand it yet. We're off to the pub, chanted some boys who, it seemed, had gotten a head start. Fuck, Boq, the ale is waiting, and it's already aged enough. Which pub, then? Maybe I'll join you in an hour, Boq said, sitting firmly back in his chair, not lifting his feet to the footstool, as he knew that this might incite his classmates to hoist him to their shoulders and carry him off with them for an evening of debauchery. His smallness seemed to inspire such banditry. Feet square on the floor made him look more planted, he figured. The boar and fennel, said Avaric. They've got a new witch performing. They say she's hot. She's a Kumbric Witch. Ha, said Boq, unconvinced. Well, go on and get a good view. I'll come along when I can. The boys rambled away, rattling doors of other friends, knocking aslant the portraits of old boys now grown into august patrons. Avaric stood in the archway and waited a minute longer. We might ditch some of the boars and take a select few of us off to the philosophy club, he said enticingly. Later on, I mean. It's the weekend after all. Oh, Avaric, go take a cold shower, said Boq. You admitted you were curious. You did. So why not an end-of-semester treat? I'm sorry I ever said I was curious. I'm curious about death, too, but I can wait to find out, thank you. Get lost, Avaric. Better go catch up with your friends. Enjoy the Kumbric antics, which, by the way, I expect is false advertising. Kumbric Witch talents went out hundreds of years ago, if indeed they ever existed. Avaric turned up the second collar of his tunic jacket. The inside was lined with a deep red velvet plush. Against his elegant shaven neck, the lining seemed like a single ribbon of privilege. Boq found himself once again making mental comparisons between himself and handsome Avaric, and coming up short. What, Avaric? He said, as impatient with himself as he was with his friend. Something has happened to you, said Avaric. I'm not that dull. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, said Boq. Tell me to mind my own business. Tell me to go flick myself, to piss off, go on, say it, but don't tell me nothing's wrong. For you're not that good a liar, and I'm not that stupid, even for a dissipated Gillikinese of decaying nobility. His expression was soft, and Boq momentarily was tempted. His mouth opened as he thought of what to say, but at the sound of bells and Ozma towers chiming the hour, Avaric's head turned just a fraction. For all his concern, Avaric wasn't entirely here. Boq closed his mouth, thought some more, and said, Call it Munchkinlander stolidity. I won't lie, Avaric. You're too good a friend to lie to. But there's nothing to say now. Now go on, enjoy yourself, but be careful. He was about to add a word of warning against the philosophy club, but checked it. If Avaric was annoyed enough, then Boq's nannyish worrying might backfire and goad Avaric into going there. Avaric came forward and kissed him on both cheeks and on the forehead, an upper-class northern custom that always made Boq profoundly ill at ease. Then, with a wink and a dirty gesture, he disappeared. And his cronies were swooping and weaving. Boq stood back in the shadows, but needn't have worried. His friends weren't thinking of him now. They had made it through the halfway point in their exams and had a breather for a couple of days. After the exams, the campus would lie vacant except for the more befuddled of the professors and the poorer of the boys. Boq had lived through this before. He preferred study, however, to scrubbing old manuscripts with a 5-haired wreck fur brush, which was what he would be employed to do in the Three Queens Library all summer long. Across the alley ran the blue stone wall of a private stable attached to some mansion house a few streets away on a fashionable square. Beyond the stable roof you could see the rounded tops of a few fruit trees in the kitchen garden of Kumbric Hall, and above them glowed the lancet windows of the dormitories and classrooms. When the girls forgot to draw their drapes, which was astoundingly often, you could see them in various stages of undress. Never the whole body naked, of course. In that case he would have looked away, or told himself sternly that he had better. But the pinkness and whiteness of underskirts and camisoles, the filminess of foundation garments, the rustle about the bustle and the fuss about the bust. It was an education in lingerie, if nothing else. Boq, who had no sisters, merely looked. The Kumbric Hall dormitory was just far enough away that he couldn't make out the individual girls, and Boq was flushed with desire to see his heart throb again. Damn! Double damn! He couldn't concentrate. He'd be sent down if he queered his exams. He'd let down his father, old Bree, and his village, and the other villages. Hell and hell. Life was hard, and barley just wasn't enough. Boq found himself suddenly leaping over the footstool, grabbing his student cape, charging down the corridors, and plummeting around the stone spiral stairs in the corner tower. He couldn't wait any more. He had to do something, and an idea had come to him. He nodded to the porter on duty, turned left out of the gate, and hurried along the road, in the dusk, avoiding as best he could the generous heaps of horse manure. At least with his classmates off gallivanting, he would make no fool of himself in their line of vision. There wasn't a soul left in Briscoe, so he turned left, then left again, and soon was pacing the alley by the stable. A rick of cordwood, the protruding edge of a swollen shutter, the iron bracket of a hoist. Boq was small, but he was nimble too, and with hardly a scrape of his knuckles he had swung himself to the tin gutter of the stable, and then was scrabbling like a lake crab up the steeply pitched roof. Aha! He might have thought of this weeks ago, months ago, but the night that all the boys would be out celebrating, the night he could be sure he himself wouldn't be seen from Briscoe Hall, that was tonight. And maybe only tonight. Some fate had insisted he resist Avaric's invitation out, for now he was mounted on the stable roof, and the wind coursing through the wet leaves of the cranberry and pear trees made a soft fanfare. And there proceeded the girls into their hall, as if they'd been waiting in the corridor until he was properly positioned, as if they'd known he was coming. Closer up they were not on the whole as pretty, but where was the one, and pretty or not they were clear. The fingers they dove into clumps of satin bough to untie them, the fingers they peeled gloves off with, and worked cunning rows of 40 miniature pearl buttons with, the fingers they loaned to each other. At the inside laces and the private places that college boys knew only by mythology, the unexpected tufts of hair, how tender, how marvelously animal-like. His hands clenched and unclenched themselves of their own accord, but hungry for what he hardly knew, and where was she? So he slipped, of course, because he was startled, and because fate, having been so kind as to award him this ecstasy, retributively was going to kill him now. He lost his footing and grabbed for the chimney, but missed. Head over thighs he rolled out like a child's toy, smashed into the poking branches of the damn pear tree, which probably saved his life, breaking his fall. He landed with a thud on a bed of lettuces, and the wind was loudly knocked out of him, mortifyingly so, through all available orifices. "Oh, brilliant," said the voice. "The trees are dropping their fruits early this year." He had a last lost hope that the person speaking would be his love. He tried to look urbane, though his spectacles had bounced somewhere. "How do you do?" he said uncertainly, sitting up. This isn't how I intended to arrive." Barefoot and aproned, she came out from behind an arbor of pink Pertha grapes. It wasn't she, it wasn't the one, it was the other one. He could tell even without his glasses. "Oh, it's you," he said, trying not to sound devastated. "She had a colander with baby grapes in it, the sour ones used in spring salads." "Oh, it's you," she said, coming closer. "I know you. Master Boq at your service." "You mean Master Boq in my lettuces?" She picked up his spectacles from the runner beans and handed them back. "How are you, Miss Elphie?" "I am not as tart as a grape, and not as squished as a lettuce," she said. "How are you, Master Boq?" "I am," he said, considerably embarrassed. "Am I going to get in trouble here? I can arrange it if you like." "Don't go to the effort. I'll let myself out the way I came in." He looked up at the pear tree. "Poor thing, I've splintered some good-sized limbs. Pity the poor tree. Why would you do that to it?" "Well, I was startled," he said, "and I had a choice. Either flip myself like a wood nymph through the leaves, or else just climb quietly down on the other side of the stable into the street and go back to my life." "Which would you choose?" "Ah, that's the question," she said. "But I've always learned that the first thing to do is deny the question's validity. Myself being startled, I would neither climb quietly streetward, nor would I trip noisily treeward and lettuce bound. I would turn myself inside out to make myself lighter. I would hover until the air pressure outside me had stabilized. Then I would let the underside of my skin settle one toe at a time back on the roof." "And would you then reverse your skin?" he said, entertained. "Depends on who was standing there and what they wanted and whether I minded. Also depends on what color the underside of my skin turns out to be. Never having reversed myself, you know, I can't be sure. I always thought it might be horrid to be pink and white like a piglet." "It often is," said Boq. "Especially in the shower. You feel like an underdone." But he stopped. The nonsense was becoming too personal. "I do beg your pardon," he said. I startled you and I didn't mean to. You were looking at the tops of the fruit trees, examining the new growth, I assume? She said, amused. Indeed, he answered coldly. Did you see the tree of your dreams? The tree of my dreams is of my dreams, and I don't speak of that to my friends nor to you, whom I hardly know. Oh, but you know me. We were in a child play set together. You reminded me when we met last year. Why, we're nearly brother and sister. You can certainly describe your favorite tree to me, and I'll tell you if I know where she grows. You mock me, Miss Elfie. Well, that I don't mean to do, Boq. She used his name without the honorific in a gentle way, as if to underscore her comment about their being like siblings. I suspect you want to know about Miss Galinda, the Gillikinese girl you met at Metamorable's poetry slaughter last autumn. Perhaps you do know me better than I thought. He sighed. Could I hope she thinks of me? Well, you could hope, said Elphaba. It would be more efficient to ask her and have done with it. At least you'd know. But you're a friend of hers, aren't you? Don't you know? You don't want to rely on what I know or not, said Elphaba, or what I say I know. I could be lying. I could be in love with you and betray my roomie by lying about her. She's your roomie? You're very surprised at that? Well, no, just please. The cooks will be wondering what dialogues with the asparagus I'm having now, Elphaba said. I could arrange to bring Miss Galinda here some evening if you like, sooner rather than later, so as to kill your joy the more neatly and entirely. If that is what's to happen, she said, but as I say, how do I know? If I can't predict what we'll have for pudding, how can I predict someone's affections? They set a date for 3 nights hence, and Boq thanked Elphaba fervently, shaking her hand so hard his spectacles jounced on his nose. You're a dear old friend, Elfie, even if I haven't seen you in 15 years, he said, giving her back her name without his honorific. She withdrew beneath the boughs of the pear trees and disappeared down the walkway. Boq found his way out of the kitchen garden and back to his room and reviewed his books again. But the problem wasn't solved. No, not solved. It was exacerbated. He couldn't concentrate. He was still awake to hear the noisy clatterings, the hushings, the crashings, and the muttered balladurings when the drunken boys returned to Briscoe Hall. Avaric had left for the summer, once the exams were done, and Boq either had flim-flammed his way through or disgraced himself, in which case there was little to lose now. This first rendezvous with Galinda might be the last. Boq bothered with his clothes more than usual, and got an opinion on how to fix his hair from the new look in the cafes, a thin white ribbon around the crown of his head, pulling his hair straight from the nub so that it burst into curls beneath, like froth exploding from an overturned basin of milk. He cleaned his boots several times over. It was too warm for boots, but he had no evening slippers. Make do, make do! On the appointed evening, he retraced his way and, on the stable roof, found that a fruit picker's ladder had been left leaning up against the wall, so he need not descend through the leaves like a vertiginous chimpanzee. He picked his way carefully down the first few rungs, then jumped manfully the rest of the way, avoiding the lettuces this time. On a bench under the wormnut tree sat Elphaba, her knees drawn casually up to her chest, and her bare feet flat on the seat of the bench, and Galinda, whose ankles were crossed daintily and who hid behind a satin fan, and who was looking in the other direction anyway. Well, my stars and garters, a visitor, said Elphaba. Such a surprise. Good evening, ladies, he said. Your head looks like a hedgehog in shock. What did you do to yourself? Said Elphaba. At least Galinda turned to see, but then she disappeared behind the fan again. Could she be so nervous? Well, I am part hedgehog, didn't I tell you? Said Boq, on my grandfather's side. He ended up as cutlets for Ozma's retinue one hunting season, and a tasty memory for all. The recipe is handed down in the family, pasted into the picture album, served with cheese and walnut sauce. Are you really? Said Elphaba. She put her chin on her knees. A really hedgehog? No, it was a fancy. Good evening, Miss Galinda. It was good of you to agree to meet me again. This is highly improper, said Galinda, for a number of reasons, as you well know, Master Boq. But my roomie would give me no rest until I said yes. I can't say that I am pleased to see you again. Oh, say it, maybe it'll make it true, said Elphaba. Try it out. He's not so bad for a poor boy. I am pleased that you are so taken with me, Master Boq, said Miss Galinda, working at courtesy. I am flattered. She clearly was not flattered. She was humiliated. But you must see that there can be no special friendship between us. Apart from the matter of my feelings, there are too many social impediments for us to proceed. I only agreed to come so that I could tell you this in person. It seemed only fair. It seemed only fair, and it might be fun too, said Elphaba. That's why I'm hanging around. There's the issue of different cultures to start, said Galinda. I know you are a Munchkinlander. I am a Gillikinese. I will need to marry one of my own. It is the only way. I'm sorry. She lowered her fan and lifted her hand, palm out, to stop his protest. And furthermore, you are a farmer from the agricultural school, and I require a statesman or a banker from Ozma Towers. This is just how things are. Besides, said Galinda, you're too short. What about his subversion of custom by coming here this way? What about his silliness? Said Elphaba. Enough, said Galinda. That'll do, Miss Elphaba. Please, you're too certain of yourself, said Boq. If I may behold. You're not so bold at all, said Elphaba. You're about as bold as tea made from used leaves. You're embarrassing me with hanging back so. Come on, say something interesting. I'm starting to wish I'd gone to chapel. You're interrupting, said Boq. Miss Elphie, you've done a wonderful thing to encourage Miss Galinda to meet me, but I must ask you to leave us alone to sort things out. Neither of you will understand what the other is saying, said Elphaba calmly. I'm a Munchkinlander by birth anyway, if not by upbringing, and I'm a girl by accident, if not by choice. I'm the natural arbiter between you two. I don't believe you can get along without me. In fact, if I leave the garden, you'll cease to decipher each other's language entirely. She speaks the tongue of rich. You speak clotted poor. Besides, I pay for this show by wheedling Miss Galinda for 3 days running. I get to watch. It would be so good of you to stay, Miss Elphaba, said Galinda. I require a chaperone when with a boy. See what I mean? Elphaba said to Boq. Then if you must stay, at least let me talk, Boq said. Please let me speak just for a few minutes, Miss Galinda. What you say is true. You are highborn and I am common. You are Gillikinese and I am Munchkinlander. You have a social pattern to conform to, and so do I. And mine doesn't include marrying a girl too wealthy, too foreign, too expectant. Her marriage isn't what I came here to propose. I came here to propose that we meet from time to time, that's all, said Boq. That we meet as friends. That, free of expectations, we come to know each other as dear friends. I do not deny that. You overwhelm me with your beauty. You are the moon in the season of shadow light. You are the fruit of the candlewood tree. You are the phoenix in circles of flight. This sounds rehearsed, said Elphaba. You are the mythical sea, he concluded, all his eggs in one basket. I'm not much for poetry, said Galinda. But you're very kind. She had seemed to perk up a little at the compliments. Anyway, the fan was moving faster. I don't really understand the point of friendship, as you call it, Master Boku, between unmarried people of our age. It seems distracting. I can see it might lead to complications, especially as you confess to an infatuation I cannot hope to return. Not in a million years. It's the age of daring, said Boq. It's the only time we have. We must live in the present. We are young and alive. I don't know if alive quite covers it, said Elphaba. This sounds scripted to me. Galinda rapped Elphaba on the head with her fan, which folded smartly up and opened just as neatly again, an elegant practiced gesture that impressed all of them. You're being tiresome, Miss Elphie. I appreciate your company, but I didn't request a running commentary. I'm perfectly capable of deciding the merits of Master Boq's recital myself. Let me consider his stupid idea. Lurline above, I can hardly hear myself think. Losing her temper, Galinda was prettier than ever. So, that old saw was true too. Boq was. Learning so much about girls. Her fan was dropping, was that a good sign? If she hadn't had some affection for him, would she have worn a dress with a neckline that dipped just a tad lower than he had dared hope? And there was the essence of rosewater on her. He felt a surge of possibility, an inclination to rub his lips on the place where her shoulder became her neck. Your merits, she was saying. Well, you're brave, I suppose, and clever to have figured this out. If Madame Morrible ever found you here, we'd be in severe trouble. Of course you might not know that, so scratch the bravery part. Just clever. You're clever and you're sort of, oh, well, I mean, to look at handsome, suggested Elphaba. Dashing? You're femme to look at, decided Galinda. Buck's face fell. Fun, he said. I'd give a lot to achieve fun, Elphaba said. The best I usually hope for is stirring, and when people say that they're usually referring to digestion, well, I might be all or none of the things you say, said Boq staunchly. But you will learn that I am persistent. I will not let you say no to our friendship, Galinda. It means too much to me. Behold the male beast roaring in the jungle for his mate, said Elphaba. See how the female beast giggles behind a shrub while she organizes her face to say, Pardon, dear, did you say something? Elphaba, they both cried at her. My word, ducky, said a voice behind them, and all three turned. It was some middle-aged minder in a striped apron, her thinning gray hair twisted in a knot on her head. What are you getting yourself up to? I'm a clutch, Galinda said. How did you think to look for me here? That Zebra cook told me some yakky was going on out here. You think they're blind in? There? Now, who is this? This don't look good at all, not to me. Boq stood. I am Master Boq of Rush Margins, Munchkinland. I am nearly a third-year fellow at Briscoe Hall. Elphaba yawned. Is this show over? Well, I am shocked. A guest don't get shown into the vegetable garden, so I guess you arrived uninvited. Sir, get yourself gone from here before I be calling the porters to remove you. Oh, I'm a clutch. Don't make a scene, said Galinda, sighing. He's hardly developed enough to worry about, pointed out Elphaba. Look, he's still beardless, and from that we can deduce. Boq said in a rush, Perhaps this is all wrong. I did not come here to be abused. Forgive me, Miss Galinda, if I have failed even to amuse you. As for you, Miss Elphaba, his voice was as cold as he could make it, and that was colder than he'd ever heard it himself. I was wrong to have trusted in your compassion. Wait and see, said Elphaba. Wrong takes an awful long time to be proven in my experience. Meanwhile, why don't you come back sometime? There is no second time to this, said Amma Clutch, tugging at Galinda, who was proving as sedentary as set cement. Miss Elphaba, shame on you for encouraging this scandal. Nothing here has been perpetrated but badinage, and bad badinage at that, said Elphaba. Miss Galinda, you're mighty stubborn there. You're planting yourself in the vegetable garden for good in the hopes that this boy visitation might occur again. Have we misread your interests? Galinda stood at last with some dignity. My dear Master Boq, she said as if dictating, it was ever my intention to dissuade you from pursuing me in romantic attachment or even in friendship, as you put it. I had not meant to bruise you. It is not in my nature. At this, Elphaba rolled her eyes, but for once kept her mouth shut, perhaps because Amma Clutch had dug her fingernails into Elphaba's elbow. I will not deign to arrange another meeting like this. As Amma Clutch reminds me, it is beneath me. Amma Clutch hadn't exactly said that, but even so, she nodded grimly. But if our paths cross in a legitimate way, Master Ba, I will do you the courtesy, at least, of not ignoring you. I trust you be satisfied with that. Never, said Boq with a smile, but it's a start. And now good evening, said Amma Clutch on behalf of them all, and steered the girls away. Fresh dreams, Master Boq, and don't come back. Miss Elphie, you were horrible, he heard Galinda say, while Elphaba twisted around and waved goodbye with a grin he could not clearly read. So the summer began. Since he passed the exams, Boq was free to plan one last year at Briscoe Hall. Daily he hid himself over to the library at Three Queens, where under the watchful eye of a titanic rhinoceros, the head archival librarian, he sat cleaning old manuscripts that clearly weren't looked at more than once a century. When the rhino was out of the room, he had flighty conversations with the two boys on either side of him. Classic Queens boys, full of gibbering gossip and arcane references, teasing and loyal. He enjoyed them when they were in good spirits, and he detested their sulks. Crope and Tibbet, Tibbet and Crope. Boq would tend to confusion when they got too arch or suggestive, which seemed to happen about once a week, but they backed off quickly. In the afternoons, they would all take their cheese sandwiches by the banks of the Suicide Canal and watch the swans. The strong boys at crew, coursing up and down the canal for summer practice, made Crope and Tibbet swoon and fall on their faces in the grass. Boq laughed at them not unkindly and waited for fate to deliver Galinda back into his path. It wasn't too long a wait. About 3 weeks after their vegetable garden liaison, on a windy summer morning, a small earthquake caused some minor damage in the Three Queens library, and the building had to be closed for some patching. Tibbet, Crope, and Boq took their sandwiches with some beakers of tea from the buttery, and they flopped down at their favorite place on the grassy banks of the canal. 15 minutes later, along came Amma Clutch with Galinda and 2 other girls. "I do believe we know you," said Amma Clutch, as Galinda stood demurely a step behind. In cases such as these, it was the servant's duty to elicit names from the strangers in the group so that they might greet each other personally. Amma Clutch registered out loud that they were Masters Boq, Crope, and Tibbet, meeting Mrs. Galinda, Shin, and Fanny. Then Amma Clutch moved a few feet away to allow the young people to address one another. Boq leaped up and gave a small bow, and Galinda said, as in line with my promise, Master Boq, "May I inquire how you're keeping?" "Very well, thank you," said Boq. "He's ripe as a peach," said Tibbet. "He's downright luscious from this angle," said Crope, sitting a few steps behind, but Boq turned and glared so fiercely that Crope and Tibbet were chastened, and fell into a mock sulk. "And you, Miss Galinda?" continued Boq, searching her well-composed face. "You are well? How thrilling to see you in Shin for the summer!" But that wasn't the right thing to say. The better girls went home for the summer, and Galinda as a Gillikinese must feel it deeply that she was stuck here like a Munchkinlander or a commoner. The fan came up, the eyes went down. The Misses Shin and Fanny touched her shoulders in mute sympathy. But Galinda sallied on. "My dear friends, the Misses Fanny and Shin are taking a house for the month of high summer on the shores of Lake George, a little fantasy house near the village of Neverdale. I've decided to make my holiday there, instead of taking that tiresome trek back to the Pertha Hills." How refreshing! He saw the beveled edges of her lacquered fingernails, the moth-colored eyelashes, the glazed and buff softness of cheek, the sensitive tuck of skin just at the cleft of her upper lip. In the summer morning light, she was dangerously, inebriatingly magnified. "Steady," said Crope, and he and Tibbet jumped up, and they each caught Boq by an elbow. He then remembered to breathe. He couldn't think of anything else to say, though, and Amma Clutch was turning her handbag around and around in her hand. "So we've got jobs," said Tibbet to the rescue. "The Three Queens Library. We're housekeeping the literature. We're the cleaning maids of culture. Are you working, Miss Galinda?" "I should think not," said Galinda. "I need a rest from my studies. It has been a harrowing year. Harrowing. My eyes are still tired from reading." "How about you girls?" said Crope, outrageously casual. But they only giggled and demurred and inched away. This was their friends' encounter, not theirs. Boq, regaining his composure, could feel the group beginning to shift itself into motion again. "And Miss Elphie?" he inquired, to hold them there. "How is your roomie? Headstrong and difficult," said Galinda severely, for the first time speaking in a normal voice, not the faint social whisper. "But thank Lurline, she's got a job, so I get some relief. She's working in the lab in the library under our Dr. Dillamond. Do you know of him?" "Shiz." "Dr. Dillamond? Do I know of him?" said Boq. "He's the most impressive biology tutor in—" "By the by," said Galinda, "he's a goat." "Yes, yes. I wish he would teach us. Even our professors acknowledge his prominence. Apparently, years ago, back in the reign of the regent and before, he used to be invited annually to lecture at Briscoe Hall. But the restrictions changed even that. So I've never really met him. Just to see him at that poetry evening last year so briefly was a treat." "Well, he does go on," said Galinda. "Brilliant he may be, but he has no sense of when he's become tedious. Anyway, Miss Elfie's hard at work, doing something or other. She will go on about it too. I think it's contagious. Well, a lab, it breeds things, said Crope. Yes, said Tibbet. And incidentally, may I add that you're every bit as lovely as Boq gushes you are. We put it down to an overactive imagination born of affectional and physical frustration. You know, said Boq, between your Miss Elfie and my erstwhile friends here, we have no real hope of friendship at all. Shall we organize a duel and kill each other instead? Count off 10 paces, turn and shoot? It would save so much bother. But Galinda didn't approve of such joking. She nodded in a dismissive way, and the group of females moved out along the graveled path following the curve of the canal. Miss Shen was heard to say, in a deep, breathy voice, "Oh, my dear, he is sweet, in a toy-like way." The voice faded out. Boq turned to rail at Crope and Tibbet, but they fell to tickling him, and they all collapsed in a heap on the remains of their lunch. And since there was no hope in changing them, Boq abandoned the impulse to correct his friends. Really, what difference did their callow banter make if Miss Galinda found him so impossible? A week or two later, on his afternoon off, Boq took himself into Railway Square. He lingered at a kiosk, staring cigarettes, airsats, love charms, naughty drawings of women undressing, and scrolls painted with lurid sunsets, overladen with one-line inspirational slogans. Lurline lives on within each heart. Safe? Keep the wizard's laws, and the wizard's laws will keep you safe. I pray to the unnamed God that justice will walk abroad, and Boq noted the variety, the pagan, the authoritarian, and the old-fashioned unionist impulses, but nothing directly sympathetic to the royalists, who had gone underground in the 16 harsh years since the wizard had first wrested power from the Ozma region. The Ozma line had been Gillikinese originally, and surely there were active pockets of resistance to the wizard. But Gillikin had, in fact, thrived under the wizard, so the royalists kept mum. Besides, everyone had heard the rumors of strict court action against turncoats and parastrophists. Boq bought a broadsheet published out of the Emerald City, several weeks old, but it was the first he'd seen in some time, and he settled down at a cafe. He read about the Emerald City Home Guard suppressing some animal dissenters who were making a nuisance of themselves in the palace gardens. He looked for news of the provinces and found a filler about Munchkinlander, which continued experiencing near drought conditions. Occasional thunderbursts would drench the ground, but the water would run off or sink uselessly into the clay. They said that hidden subterranean lakes underlay the Vincus region, that water resources there could serve the whole of Oz. But the idea of a canal system across the entire country made everyone laugh. The expense! There was great disagreement between the eminences and the Emerald City as to what was to be done. Secession, thought Boq seditiously, and looked up to see Elphaba, alone, without even a nanny or ama standing over him. "What a delicious expression you have on your face, Boq," she said. "It's much more interesting than love." "It is love, in a way," said Boq, then remembered himself and leaped to his feet. "Won't you join me? Please, take a seat, unless you're worried about being unchaperoned." She sat down, looking a bit etiolated, and allowed him to call for a cup of mineral tea. She had a parcel in brown paper and string under her arm. "A few trinkets for my sister," she said. "She's like Miss Galinda. She loves the fancy outside of things. I found a Vincus shawl in the bazaar, red roses on a black background with black and green fringe. I'm sending it to her, and a pair of striped stockings that Amma Clutch knitted for me." "I didn't know you had a sister," he said. "Was she in the playgroup we were in together?" "She's 3 years younger," Elphaba said. "She'll come to Crage Hall before long." "Is she as difficult as you are?" "She's difficult in a different way. She's crippled pretty severely, is my Nessa Rose, so she's a handful. Even Madame Morrible doesn't quite know the extent of it. But by then I'll be a third-year girl and will have the nerve to stand up to the head, I guess. If anything gives me nerve, it's people making life hard for Nessa Rose. Life is already hard enough for her." "Is your mama raising her?" "My mother is dead. My father is in charge nominally." "Nominally?" "He's religious," said Elphaba, and made the circling palms gesture that indicated you could grind millstone against millstone all you liked. But there wasn't any corn in the land that could produce flour if there was no grain to grind. It sounds very hard for you all. How did your mama die? She died in childbirth, and this is the end of the personal interview. Tell me about Dr. Gillikinese. I hear you're working for him. Tell me about your amusing campaign for the heart of Galinda the Ice Queen. Boq really wanted to hear about Dr. Gillikinese, but was derailed by Elphaba's remark. I will keep on, Elphic, I will. When I see her, I'm so smitten with longing. It's like fire in my veins. I can't speak, and the things I think about are like visions. It's like dreaming. It's like floating in your dreams. I don't dream. Tell me, is there any hope? What does she say? Does she ever even imagine that her feelings for me might change? Elphaba sat with her 2 elbows on the table, her hands clasped in front of her face, her 2 forefingers leaning against each other and against her thin, grayish lips. You know, Boq, she said, the thing is I have become fond of Galinda myself. Behind her starry-eyed love of herself, there is a mind struggling to work. She does think about things. When her mind is really working, she could, if led, think on you, even, I suspect, somewhat fondly. I don't know. But when she slides back into herself, I mean into the girl who spends 2 hours a day curling that beautiful hair, it's as if the thinking Galinda goes into some internal closet and shuts the door. Or as if she's in hysterical retreat from things that are too big for her. I love her both ways, but I find it odd. I wouldn't mind leaving myself behind if I could, but I don't know the way out. I propose you're being hard on her, and you're certainly too forward, said Boq sternly. Were she sitting here, I think she'd be astounded to hear you speak so freely. I'm just trying to behave as I think a friend should behave. Granted, I haven't had much practice. Well, I question your friendship with me if you consider Miss Galinda your friend too, and if that's how you tear a friend apart in her absence. Though Boq was irritated, he found that this was a more lively discussion than the conventional patter he and Galinda had so far exchanged. He didn't want to burn Elphaba off with criticism. I'm ordering you another mineral tea, he said in an authoritative voice, his father's voice in fact, and then you can tell me about Dr. Gillikinese. Skip the tea. I'm still nursing this one, and you have no more money than I do, I bet, said Elphaba. But I'll tell you about Dr. Gillikinese, unless you are too affronted at the slice and angle of my opinions. Please, perhaps I am wrong, said Boq. Look, it's a nice day. We're both off the campus. How do you come to be out alone, by the way? Is your escape sanctioned by Madame Morrible? Take a guess about that, she said. Once it was clear that you could come and go from Kumbric Hall by way of the vegetable garden and the roof of the adjacent stable, I decided I could too. I'm never missed. That's hard for me to believe, said he daringly, for you're not the kind who blends into the woodwork. Now, tell me about Dr. Gillikinese. He's my idol. She sighed and set the package down on the table at last and settled in for a long chat. She told him about Dr. Gillikinese's work in natural essences, trying to determine by scientific method what the real differences were between animal and animal tissue and between animal and human tissue. The literature on the matter, she had learned from doing the legwork herself, was all couched in unionist terms and pagan terms before that, and they didn't hold up to scientific scrutiny. Don't forget Shiz University was originally a unionist monastery, said Elphaba. So despite the anything-goes attitude among the educated elite, there are still bedrocks of unionist bias. But I'm a unionist, said Boq, and I don't see the conflict. The unnamed God is accommodating to many ranges of being, not just human. Are you talking about a subtle bias against animals, interwoven into early unionist tracts and still in operation today? That's certainly what Dr. Gillikinese thinks, and he's a unionist himself. Explain that paradox and I'd be glad to convert. I admire the goat intensely, but the real interest of it to me is the political slant. If he can isolate some bit of the biological architecture to prove that there isn't any difference, deep down in the invisible pockets of human and animal flesh, that there's no difference between us or even among us. If you take in animal flesh too, well, you see the implications. No, said Boq, I don't think I do. How can the bans on animal mobility be upheld if Dr. Dillerman can prove scientifically that there isn't any inherent difference between humans and animals? Oh, now that's a blueprint for an impossibly rosy future, said Boq. Think about it, said Elphaba. Think, Boq. On what grounds could the wizard possibly continue to publish those bans? How could he be persuaded not to? The wizard has dissolved the Hall of Approval indefinitely. I don't believe, Elphick, that the wizard is open to entertaining arguments, even by as august an animal as Dr. Dillerman. But, of course, he must be. He's a man in power. It's his job to consider changes in knowledge. When Dr. Dillerman has his proof, he'll write to the wizard and begin to lobby for change. No doubt he'll do his best to let animals the land over know what he's intending, too. He isn't a fool. Well, I didn't say he was a fool, said Boq. But how close do you think he is to getting firm evidence? I am a student handmaid, said Elphaba. I don't even understand what he means. I'm only a secretary, an amanuensis. You know, he can't write things himself. He can't manage a pen with his hoofs. I take dictation, and I file, and I dash to the Crage Hall Library and look things up. Briscoe Hall Library would be a better place to hunt for that kind of material, said Boq. Even Three Queens, where I worked this summer, has stacks of documents from the monks' observations of animal and vegetable life. I know I am not traditionally presented, said Elphaba, but I believe on the grounds of being a girl, I am excluded from the Briscoe Hall Library. And on the grounds of being an animal, so too, now at least, is Dr. Dillerman. So those valuable resources are off limits to us. Well, said Boq carelessly, if you knew exactly what you wanted, I have access to the stacks in both collections, and when the good doctor is finished ferreting out the difference between animals and people, I will propose he apply the same arguments to the differences between the sexes, said Elphaba. Then she registered what Boq had said and stretched out her hand almost as if to touch him. Oh, Boq, on behalf of Dr. Dillerman, I accept your generous offer of help. I'll get the first list of sources to you within the week. Just leave my name out of it. I don't care so much about incurring horrible Marble's wrath against myself, but I don't want her taking out her annoyance on my sister, Nesserose. She downed the last of her tea, gathered her parcel, and had sprung up almost before Boq could pull himself to his feet. Various customers, lingering over their elevenses with their own broadsheets or novellas, looked up at the ungainly girl pushing out the doors. As Boq settled back down, hardly yet registering what he had gotten himself into, he realized slowly but thoroughly that this morning there were no animals taking their morning tea in here. No animals at all. In years to come, and Boq would live a long life, he would remember the rest of the summer as scented with the must of old books, when ancient script swam before his eyes. He sleuthed alone in the musty stacks. He hovered over the mahogany drawers lined with vellum manuscripts, all-season jong, it seemed. The lozenge-paned windows between bluestone mullions and transoms misted over again and again with flecks of small but steady rain, almost as brittle and pesky as sand. Apparently the rain never made it as far as Munchkinlander, but Boq tried not to think about that. Crope and Tibbet were coerced into researching for Dr. Dillerman, too. At first they had to be dissuaded from going about their forays in costumes of disguised fake pince-nez, powdered wigs, cloaks with high collars, all to be found in the well-stocked locker of the Three Queens Student Theatrical and Terpsichorean Society. But when convinced of the seriousness of the mission, they fell to with gusto. Once a week they met Boq and Elphaba in the cafe in Railway Square. Elphaba showed up during these misty weeks, entirely swathed in a brown cloak with a hood and veil that hid all but her eyes. She wore long, frayed gray gloves that she boasted buying second-hand from a local undertaker, cheap for having been used in funeral services. She sheathed her bamboo pole legs in a double thickness of cotton stocking. The first time Boq saw Elphaba like this, he said, I just barely managed to convince Crope and Tibbet to lose the espionage drag, and you come in looking like the original Kumbric Witch. I don't dress for your approval, boys, she said, shucking her cloak and folding it inside out so that the wet wool never touched her. On the occasion when another care patron would come through, shaking water off an umbrella, Elphaba always recoiled, flinching if she was caught by even a scattering of drops. Is that religious conviction, Elfie, that you keep yourself so dry? Said Boq. I've told you before, I don't comprehend religion, although conviction is a concept I'm beginning to get. In any case, someone with a real religious conviction is, I propose, a religious convict and deserves locking up. Hence, observed Croak, your aversion to all water. Without your knowing it, it might be a baptismal splash, and then your liberty as a free-range agnostic would be curtailed. I thought you were too self-absorbed to notice my spiritual pathology, said Elphaba. Now, boys, what we got today? Every time, Boq thought, would that Galinda were here? For the casual camaraderie that grew up among them during these weeks was so refreshing, a model of ease and even wit. Against convention they had dropped the honorifics. They interrupted one another and laughed and felt bold and important because of the secrecy of their mission. Croak and Tibbet cared little about animals or the bands. They were both Emerald City Boys' sons, respectively, of a tax collector and of a palace security advisor, but Elphaba's passionate belief in the work enlivened them. Boq himself grew more involved, too. He imagined Galinda drawing her chair up with them, losing her upper crust reserve, allowing her eyes to glow with a shared and secret purpose. I thought I knew all the shapes of passion, Elphaba said one bright afternoon. I mean, growing up with a unionist minister for a father. You come to expect that theology is the fundament on which all other thought and belief is based. But boys, this week, Dr. Dillerman made some sort of a scientific breakthrough. I'm not sure what it was, but it involved manipulating lenses, a pair of them, so he could peer at bits of tissue that he had laid on a transparent glass and backlit by candlelight. He began to dictate, and he was so excited that he sang his findings. He composed arias out of what he was seeing. Recitatives about structure, about color, about the basic shapes of organic life. He has a horrible sandpapery voice, as you might imagine, for a goat. But how he warbled! Tremolo on the annotations, vibrato on the interpretations, and sostenuto on the implications. Long, triumphant, open vowels of discovery. I was sure someone would hear. I sang with him. I read his notes back to him like a student of musical composition. The good doctor was emboldened by his findings, and he required that their digging become more and more focused. He did not want to announce any breakthroughs until he had figured out the most politically advantageous way to present them. Toward the end of the summer, the push was on to find Lurlinist and early Unionist disquisitions on how the animals in the animals had been created and differentiated. It's not a matter of uncovering a scientific theory by a pre-scientific company of Unionist monks or pagan priests and priestesses, explained Elphaba, but Dr. Dillerman wants to authenticate the way our ancestors thought about this. The wizard's right to impose unjust laws may be better challenged if we know how the old codgers explained it to themselves. It was an interesting exercise. In one form or another, we all know some of the origin myths that predate the Oziad, said Tibbet, throwing his blonde bangs back with a theatrical flourish. The most coherent one has our dear putative fairy queen Lurline on a voyage. She was tired of travel in the air. She stopped and called from the desert sands, a font of water hidden deep beneath the earth's dry dunes. The water obeyed in such abundance that the land of Oz in all its febrile variety sprang up almost instantly. Lurline drank herself into a stupor and went for a long rest on the top of Mount Runcible. When she awoke, she relieved herself copiously, and this became the Gillikin River, running around the vast tracts of the great Gillikin forest and skirting through the eastern edges of the Vincas, and coming to a stop at Restwater. The animals were terricolous and thus of a lower order than Lurline and her retinue. Don't look at me like that. I know what that word means. I looked it up. It means living on or near the ground. The animals had come into their being as rolled clots of earth dislodged from the exuberant plant growth. When Lurline let loose, the animals thought the raging stream was a flood sent to drown their fresh new world, and they despaired of their existence. In a panic, they flung themselves into the torrent and attempted to swim through Lurline's urine. Those who became intimidated and turned back remained animals. beasts of burden, slaughtered for flesh, hunted for fun, counted as profit, admired as innocent. Those who swam on and made it to the farther shore were given the gifts of consciousness and language. What a gift to be able to imagine your own death, muttered Crope. Thus, animals. Convention, as long ago as history can remember, divides the animals and animals. Baptism by piss, said Elphaba. Is that a subtle way both to explain the talents of animals and to denigrate them at the same time? Or the martyrs? Or the ghosts who live underground now and stop up the water supply so the fields of Munchkinland dry up today? They all laughed and had more tea brought to the table. I found some later scriptures with a more unionist slant, Boq said. They tell a story that I guess will be derived from the pagan narrative, but it has been cleaned up some. The flood, occurring sometime after creation and before the advent of humankind, wasn't a massive piss by Lurline, but the sea of tears wept by the unnamed god on the god's only visit to Oz. The unnamed god perceived the sorrow that would overwhelm the land throughout time and bawled in pain. The whole of Oz was a mile deep in saltwater tides. The animals kept afloat by means of the odd log, the uprooted tree. Those who swallowed enough of the tears of the unnamed god were imbued with the fulsome sympathy for their kin, and they began to construct rafts from the flotsam. They saved their kind out of mercy, and from their kindness they became a new sentient lot, the animals. Another kind of baptism, from within, said Tibbet. Ingestion, I like it. But what of the pleasure faith, said Crope. Can a witch or a sorcerer take an animal and through a spell create an animal? Well, that's the thing I've been looking into, said Elphaba. The pleasure fathers, the fathers say that if anything Lurline or the unnamed god could have done it once, magic could do it again. They even hint that the original distinction between animals and animals was a Kumbric Witch spell, so strong and enduring it has never worn off. This, a thing as a Kumbric Witch, let alone if there ever was. Myself, I think it's a part of the Lurlinist cycle that's gotten detached and developed independently. Errant nonsense. We have no proof that magic is so strong. We have no proof that God is so strong, interrupted Tibbet, which strikes me as being as good an argument against God as it is against magic, said Elphaba. But never mind that. The point is, if it is an enduring Kumbric spell, centuries old, it may be reversible. Or it may be perceived to be reversible, which is just as bad. In the interim, while sorcerers are at work experimenting with charms and spells, the animals lose their rights, one by one, just slowly enough so that it's hard to see as a coherent political campaign. It's a dicey scenario, and one that Dr. Dilliman hasn't figured out. At this point, Elphaba hitched the loose part of her cloak up over her head and disappeared into the shadows of its folds. What? Said Boq, but she put a finger to her lips. Crope and Tibbet, as if on cue, launched into some silly banter about their professional goals of being abducted by pirates of the desert and made to dance the fandango dressed only in slave shackles. Boq saw nothing amiss. A couple of clerks reading the racing forms. Some genteel ladies with their lemonades and novellas. A TikTok creature buying coffee beans by the pound. A parody of an old professor figuring out some theorem by arranging and rearranging some sugar cubes along the edge of his butter knife. A few minutes later, Elphaba relaxed. That TikTok thing works at Crage Hall. I think it's called grammatic. Usually it shadows Mad Marble like a lovesick puppy. I don't think it saw me, but she was too jittery to continue the conversation, and after she made sure their next assignments were clear, the crew disbanded into the misty streets. 2 weeks before Briscoe Hall reconvened for the new semester, Avaric returned from his home, the seat of the Margrave of Ten Meadows. He was bronzed with summer leisure and eager for fun. He mocked Boq for having struck up friendships with boys from 3. Queens! And under other circumstances, Boq would probably have let his new alliance with Crope and Tibbet lapse. But they were all engaged in Dr. Dilliman's research now, and Boq just put up with Avaric's taunting. Elphaba remarked one day that she had had a letter from Galinda away with her friends on Lake George. Can you believe it? She proposed I take a coach and come visit for a weekend, said Elphaba. She must really be bored out of her mind with those society girls. But she's society herself. How could she be bored? Asked Boq. Don't ask me to explain the nuances of that circle, said Elphaba, but I suspect that our Miss Galinda isn't quite as society as she makes out. Well, Elfie, when are you going? Asked Boq. Never, said Elphaba. This work is too important. Let me see the letter. I don't have it. Bring it to me. What are you on about? Maybe she needs you. She always seems to need you. She needs me? Elphaba laughed coarsely, loudly. Well, I know you're besotted, and I feel somewhat responsible. I'll show you the letter next week, but I'm not going to go just to give you a vicarious thrill, Boq. Friend or no friend. The next week she unfolded the letter. My dear Miss Elphaba, I am bade to write to you by my hostesses, the Mrs. Fanna of Fan Hall and Shenshin of the Minkos clan. We are having a lovely summer at Lake George. The air is calm and sweet, and all is as pleasant as anything. If you would like to visit us for 3 or 4 days before school begins, we know you have been hard at work all summer, and so, a little change. If you would like to come, no need to write if you would like to visit. Just arrive by coach at Neverdale and come by foot or hire a hansom cab. It's just a mile or 2 by the bridge. The house is dear, covered in roses and ivy. It is called the Caprice, in the Pines. Who wouldn't love it here? I do hope you can come. I do very, especially hope so for reasons I dare not write. I cannot advise you as to chaperones, as Alina Clutch is already here, and so is Ama and Ama Vimp. You can decide. We hope for long hours of amusing conversation. Ever your loving friend, Miss Galinda, of the Arduenas of the Upland. 33 high summer, midday at Caprice in the Pines. But you must go, Boq cried. Look how she writes to you. She writes like someone who doesn't write very often, Elphaba observed. I do hope you can come, she says. She needs you, Elfie. I insist that you go. Oh, you do? Why don't you go then, said Elphaba. I hardly can go without having been invited. Well, that's easy enough. I'll write and tell her to invite you. Elphaba reached for a pencil in her pocket. Don't patronize me, Miss Elphaba, said Boq sternly. This must be taken seriously. You are lovesick and deluded, said Elphaba, and I don't like your retreating back to Miss Elphaba to punish me for disagreeing with you. Besides, I can't go. I have no chaperone. I'll be your chaperone. Ha! As if Madame Morrible would allow that. Well, how about Boq tossed it around? How about my friend Avaric? He's the son of a Margrave. He's spotless by virtue of his station. Even Madame Momble would quail before a Margrave's son. Madame Morrible wouldn't quail before a hurricane. Besides, have you no concern for me? I don't feel like traveling with this Avaric. Elfie, said Boq. You owe me. I've been helping you out all summer, and I've had Crope and Tibbet helping too. Now you have to pay me back. You ask Dr. Dillerman for a few days off, and I'll ask Avaric, who is bursting to do something. The 3 of us will go to Lake George. Avaric and I will rent a room in an inn, and will stay a very short time. Just long enough to make sure that Miss Galinda is all right. It's you I'm worried about, not her, said Elphaba, and Boq could see that he had won. Madame Momble would not release Elphaba in the care of Avaric. Your dear father would never forgive me, she said. But I am not the horrible Morrible you think of me. Oh yes, I know your little pet names for me, Miss Elphaba. Amusing and juvenile. I am concerned for your welfare. And with all your hard work all summer, I see that you have grown, shall we say, verdigration? So I shall make a compromise proposal, provided that you can convince Master Avaric and Master Boq to travel with you, and my own little grammatique, whom I will loan in your care and to care for you. I shall permit your little summer fun. Elphaba, Boq, and Avaric rode in the coach, and Grammatic was made to ride on top with the luggage. Elphaba met Boq's eyes from time to time, grimacing, but she ignored Avaric, to whom she had taken an instant dislike. When he had finished with the pages of his racing form, Avaric teased Boq about this trip. I should have known when I left for the summer that you were mooning about in the throes of love. You developed this serious set of chin. It misled me. I thought it was consumption at least. You should have come out with me that night before I left. A visit to the philosophy club would have been just what the doctor ordered. Boq was mortified to